Hey everyone! So let's talk about a challenge that pretty much every single person who's ever stood in front of a room faces. How do you stop talking at people and start getting them truly engaged? Today, we're going to dive into how you can transform that classic one-way lecture into a dynamic conversation that actually makes a difference.
And let's just kick things off with this quote from Ellen Weber because it really hits the nail on the head. Lectures actually work against the human brain. They foster a couch potato mentality. Oof, for so long, the lecture has been the go-to method, right? But what if it's just fundamentally not how we're built to learn? That's the problem we're going to unpack and solve right now.
So let's start by taking a hard look at the lecture itself. You know the scene. One expert, one voice, talking to a room full of quiet, passive people. But as you're about to see, the things that make lectures seem efficient are also their greatest downfall. Now, to be fair, there's a reason we all lean on lectures. They're cheap, they're a super fast way to get a lot of information out there, and they're great for introducing a brand new topic. But the trade-off? It's huge. When all the information is flowing in just one direction, learners become passive. Retention rates just plummet. And for teaching actual skills or, changing someone's perspective, forget about it.
Okay, so to fix this, we really need to get into the science of how we, as adults, actually learn. This is a field called Andragogy, and it's where the whole lecture model just completely falls apart.
And here is the absolute key difference. See, pedagogy, that's teaching kids, works because children are often motivated by external things, like grades. They learn stuff because a teacher tells them it'll be important someday. But adults, we're a different breed. Our motivation is internal. It's driven by our own goals, our own sense of achievement. We have to see how we can use something right now. And we only really learn what we ourselves believe is valuable.
Which brings us to these core principles. You see, teaching adults effectively isn't about just dumping information into their brains. It's about creating an environment, one that feels safe enough to ask questions and make mistakes. One where the learning is tied directly to real-world problems. And most importantly, it has to respect the lifetime of experience that every single person brings into the room. It all comes down to active participation and letting people guide their own learning.
So just how big of a difference are we talking about between just listening and actually doing? Well, it's staggering. Research shows adults might retain maybe 20% of what they hear, but that number skyrockets all the way to 90% for things they hear, see, say, and do. That's not just a small improvement, that is a complete game changer.
So here's the bottom line. If you want what you're teaching to actually stick, you have to get your audience out of their seats, metaphorically speaking. You've got to move them from being spectators to being active participants. It's really the difference between watching a sport on TV and actually being on the field playing the game. Active involvement is everything.
All right, so that's the why. Now let's get into the how. How do we actually put this stuff into practice? Let's start with that big lecture hall. Is it really possible to make 100 people feel like they're part of a conversation? Yes, absolutely it is.
Your entire goal can be summed up like this. You need to stop giving a monologue and start facilitating a dialogue. Every technique we're about to look at is designed to do just that, to break up that one-way street of information and open up lanes for interaction, even in a huge room.
And here's your starter kit, your interactive toolbox. You can pause for a quick brainstorm to see what people already know. Or, one of my favorites, try a think, pair, share. Just by giving people a minute to think about a question on their own before they turn to a neighbor to discuss it, wow, the quality of the conversation goes through the roof, and you hear from way more people, not just the ones who think the fastest. Simple things, right? Asking good questions. Or even creating little buzz groups for 2 minutes to talk about one specific point. They work.
Okay, so that's great for large groups. But for our second set of solutions, let's zoom in on the incredible power of small groups. This is really where the deep collaborative learning magic happens, especially once you understand how these little teams actually work. First off, what do we even mean by group dynamics? It's not just throwing a few people together and hoping for the best. It's the flow. It's the energy. It's all the little interactions and communications that propel a group toward its goal. Think of it as the engine of teamwork.
And that engine follows a pretty predictable path, which Tuckman laid out in these 5 stages. Groups start by forming, just getting their bearings. Then, and this is so important, they almost always enter a storming phase. There's going to be some conflict, some friction. Your job isn't to prevent it. It's a totally normal and necessary step. You just have to guide them through it. Because after the storm comes norming, where they start to gel, and that leads to performing, where the real work gets done. before they finally adjourn when the task is complete. And this is exactly why small groups are so critical in places like medical schools. This isn't just an academic exercise. It creates deep learning, where you're not just memorizing facts, you're connecting them to actions. It builds teamwork skills and, this is huge, it simulates the real-world healthcare teams these students will be a part of for their entire careers.
And of course, you have different tools for different jobs. Think about it. Case-based learning is all about analysis, using your knowledge to solve a complex problem. Role-play, though, is about experience. It's about building empathy and practicing tough conversations in a place where it's safe to fail. Each method, from the fishbowl to the seminar, is designed for a very specific outcome.
So, we've got all these incredible tools for large groups and small groups. The big question is, how do you know which one to pick? Well, the secret is aligning your method with what you're actually trying to achieve.
And this little chart is basically your cheat sheet. It breaks things down perfectly. If your goal is purely cognitive, just getting knowledge across, then yeah, a lecture or seminar can still work, especially when you mix in discussion. But if you're trying to teach a psychomotor skill, something physical, you have to get people's hands dirty with demonstrations and simulations. And if you're trying to influence the affective domain, people's attitudes and values, well, that's where things like role play and debate become your most powerful tools.
So we're going to leave you with this one simple question to think about. Moving from a monologue to a dialogue, it doesn't mean you have to burn down your entire lesson plan overnight. It just starts with one small change. So, what is the one interactive technique you're going to try in your next class, your next training, or even your next team meeting? Because that one small step is all it takes to start a real conversation. Thanks for tuning in.